The music streaming service Spotify exercises an enormous amount of control in making and breaking artists if they end up on one of their super popular playlists. This week they announced they'd be removing certain artists who've been accused of, and in some cases been convicted of, really offensive things like sexual assault, unlawful imprisonment. But does this cross over into censorship? Does it affect free speech? To debate that, we have Peter Marks from Access Informatics and Ray Johnson, the editor of the technology website Gizmodo. Ray, walk me through exactly what happened with Spotify this week.
What Spotify has done is basically choose to remove artists that don't align with the company's values from their curated playlists that the employees are putting together, and also their algorithmic playlists. So if you're clicking on one of their, artists like this kind of thing, those artists won't pop up there.
And of course, the reason for this is that R. Kelly has been accused of sexual assault, and XXXTentacion has been accused of assaulting a pregnant woman and I think illegal home imprisonment. So there are some pretty serious things that both of them are facing. I'm curious, though, about the line. Where does one draw the line with this, right? So, as a friend of mine pointed out the other day, there's a whole host of very famous musical artists that have been accused of sexual assault over the years, including...
and convicted.
And convicted as well.
And these particular people have not been convicted. So it's interesting that they've acted on allegations rather than on convictions. If you're going to go on convictions, it's been pointed out that there's a huge number of artists who have convictions in their past, including, David Bowie, Don Henley, Steven Tyler, Vera Smith, Chris Brown, lots of people who would fall into that category.
On principle, you see the headline, you go, oh, that's good that they're removing people that have been accused of these heinous things. However, I am curious about how you manage the contours of that, and does also raise what, particularly for Americans, is a free speech issue as well. So I'm keen to kind of get a sense of where everybody sits on this. So as they've laid it out, yes, you can still find these artists. They are still in there if you want to find them. But what they've done, as you say, is they've removed them from their playlists. Do you think that is the right strategy, Ray?
Look, I don't disagree with it, to be honest. I think it's probably...
Interesting position, I like it.
I don't disagree. I think it's going to expand. I think that this is the beginning, and I think that these two artists have been singled out because they are prominent at the moment for the things that they're being done. It's currently in the news. I think that this is something that will filter down to other artists, particularly ones that have had convictions, because if they're going to be consistent with this, that's what they have to do, right? And this is responding to criticism of Spotify, promoting these artists that don't comply with the values of Spotify. So they're going to have to keep going and toe the line.
But then let's look about the historic examples, right? Is there now a responsibility to look at Don Henley, to look at David Bowie and go, well, we're looking at this through a 2018 lens. Should we still be promoting these people on any number of the classic album playlists they have?
Well, yeah, so maybe, and also there's many well-known artists who've been accused of domestic violence, for example, including John Lennon was mentioned, Ringo Starr. I mean, if you start to broaden out this and apply it consistently across all artists, it's just a nightmare. I think the bigger question, though, is do you really want Spotify and their algorithm to be the arbiter, to be editorial and actually choosing between artists? It is just a platform. It's the old platform versus editorial argument.
Spotify's always had a curatorial aspect to it. Like those playlists, there are algorithmic playlists, but those really big playlists, they're made by people. And so there's a choice being made at any point anyway.
And they're really important. To be on those playlists is how new listeners find you. So it's about discovery. So it's incredibly important. Spotify's, 75 million paid users now? So it's huge. It is the biggest by far. I think the second one is Apple, who's about 40 million, something like that, although catching up over time. So it's hugely important. And given that radio is kind of experiencing a decline as the way of finding artists for listeners.
Radio's really important.
Radio continues to be really important, but all the time you listen to radio and hear the rest of this on the podcast. So, radio maybe is a bit like the curated playlist. It's a place that you discover new things and then you go and engage in them more deeply. But yeah, do you want Spotify or any platform to be actually an arbiter of the law? And the other argument, the counter argument about people who've been prosecuted is that they've done their time. So once they've paid the penalty, and the people that we're dealing with in this case are people who have been accused. So maybe they haven't been punished yet.
That's a grey area because underreported sexual assaults, there's a whole bunch of complicated issues there.
Also, Spotify is a truly global platform. You've got so many different countries with different cultural definitions of, what exactly is offensive, bad behaviour.
Might be offensive in a Muslim country and not in another country.
Or an aging French actress considers offensive compared to what modern America thinks is offensive.
Spotify have actually been forced in this process to consult with, I think it's something like 50 organisations all around the world, advocacy groups, in order to come up with these guidelines. They've worked really hard on this to try and do it right.
I mean, there is an argument to be said that there's a PR element to it, but I also think now is the time you want big, powerful media, particularly technology companies, to be out front about what their actual values are.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because the argument about people saying that they're a platform,
don't you think it's hashtag we're doing something too?
Maybe it is, but I also think at this day and age, the argument that particularly Facebook and Google and to an extent Twitter have put up that we're just a platform, what people do on our platform is their own business, is garbage. I don't think people accept it anymore. And I think at least you can debate whether this is the right way of tackling it, but at least Spotify have come out and went, we have values and they are this, and this.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. Transparency is really important. What we don't want to have happen, and that's what may happen with Twitter, is that people are silently silenced and we don't know why their tweets aren't getting through or their content isn't getting promoted because some algorithm has decided that you no longer fit our value.
All right, there is lots more of this very thorny discussion in the podcast. So download this show and it is available right now. See you guys.